What's up, Mech fans, and welcome back to the channel. So just over a month ago, we got the launch of a brand new console, that being this thing right here, the Nintendo Switch 2. And alongside playing Mario Kart World, which of course was the major launch title that released alongside this console, I did go back and play SD Gundam Battle Alliance, which I never played on the Switch, but I played on the PS5, and I wanted to give it a go on a portable console. So today, I'm going to talk about whether or not it is worth playing on the Nintendo Switch 2 in 2025. Before we get into it though, please do leave a like on this video and subscribe if you're a fan of mecha anime content and want to see plenty more videos like this in the future. Also, head on down to the comments section below, let me know your thoughts on SD Gundam Battle Alliance if you've played it. If you have played it on the Nintendo Switch 2, what's your experience been like with it? Do you think it is worth picking up? Do you think it is worth going back and replaying? Let me know all that down in the comments section below. So last August, I did actually do a video talking about SD Gundam Battle Alliance, revisiting it after 2 years, but that was on the PS5. For this video, I'm not really going over my thoughts on the game as a whole. This is more so my perspective of whether or not it is worth going back to or playing for the first time on the Nintendo Switch 2, whether it is worth picking up the console specifically to play it as compared to playing it on the Nintendo Switch or the PS5 or PS4, whatever console you wish to play it on. However, for those that haven't seen that video that I did last year, I want to give my brief thoughts on the game anyway. It is one that I really love. It is probably my favorite Gundam game out of the ones that I've played. I've played more of the modern ones, so you know, your classic like Federation versus Xeon and Giran's Greed, all that kind of stuff. I've never played any of those games. I've also played ones from basically SD Gundam Battle Alliance onwards, and then a couple of other ones like New Gundam Breaker and things like that. So SD Gundam Battle Alliance is probably my favorite. I think the gameplay is fantastic. I think graphically it looks great. Of course, it's got, you know, plenty of mobile suits. I like the upgrading system. I like the different variety of maps. I like the kind of like crossover aspect of, you know, mixing and matching different eras and different characters, different mobile suits, all that kind of stuff. Like, I just think it's a great game in concept, and then it's executed very well with its gameplay as well. So diving into it on the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, I have not played it on the Nintendo Switch, or I have a little bit, but prior to actually playing it on Nintendo Switch 2, like, I never owned it on Nintendo Switch initially. Like I said, I played it on the PS5. So my perspective of whether or not it is worth picking up is in comparison to the Switch version, but also in comparison to the PS5 version. And I will say right off the bat, if you own the PS5 version, or even if you own the PS4 version, I don't think it's necessarily worth picking up on the Switch 2. If you own the Switch version, I don't think it is worth going out and buying a Nintendo Switch 2 specifically for this game. However, if, you know, in the circumstance where you own SD Gundam Battle Alliance on Switch, and you also now own a Switch 2, I definitely think that it is worth revisiting because there's a lot in there that's quite upgraded. As far as I am aware, there isn't a Switch 2 upgrade or Switch 2 specific version, or even just like a little patch or whatever that they did for SD Gundam Battle Alliance. But when I was playing it, you can notice a difference in quality, and it comes down to the hardware. Now, starting off with it in the handheld tabletop mode, this is where I don't think it's necessarily worth playing, because whilst yes, it's great to play it in handheld, in comparison to the Switch version, there's not a whole lot of difference there. Personally, I own a Switch OLED, and of course the Switch 2 screen is actually an LCD screen, which, you know, depending on who you ask, is worse or better. Personally, I think that an OLED is better. It's got like better contrast and you know, deeper colors and all that kind of stuff, whereas an LCD screen, it's a little bit brighter, and of course, like, it has its ups and downs compared to that of the OLED, so they both have the positives and negatives to them. But personally, I just think that an OLED screen, it just kind of feels a bit more rich and deeper in terms of its colors, which I personally like just a little bit more. But if you're someone who prefers it to be, you know, all bright and colorful, then, you know, maybe the LCD screen is the way to go. But in my opinion, on the tabletop handheld version, I don't think this game looks all that great. Now, it doesn't look bad, but when I was playing it, I thought that it looked quite blurry, especially when it comes to the actual like in-game kind of stuff. If I looked closer at, you know, like the sprites, the playable characters, the mobile suits, all that kind of stuff, it just kind of looked slightly blurred and a little bit more pixelated. Now, again, it doesn't look bad, and at the end of the day, if you're playing it in a handheld mode, you're not going to be, you know, analyzing all these little details. And let's face it, no one ever buys a Nintendo console for the sake of graphics. However, it's definitely noticeable. Like, it just doesn't look quite as good. So from a handheld perspective, yes, it plays very well on handheld. From a performance perspective, I have no issues with it. Like, it runs extremely well, it runs at a consistent frame rate, everything you would expect. Like, you're not gonna run into major issues playing it, especially on the Switch 2, but whether you're playing it on Switch, whether you're playing it on PS4, PS5, like, it generally is a game that just runs at a consistent frame rate. It's just very solid, like, it doesn't run into major performance issues. And I do also feel like with the nature of the game and the kind of style of it being that more chibi SD style, it does lend itself to being more of a handheld game. This is the kind of style that you could imagine playing on a Nintendo DS, for example. Not necessarily the specific game; it's a little bit too complicated and graphics heavy for a Nintendo DS. But this kind of style of game, the chibi, more cutesy style, I think lends itself very well to a handheld console, more so even than like Gundam Breaker 4 or Gundam Seed Battle Destiny Remastered. I think the SD Gundam Battle Alliance is probably one of the better games you could get on handheld for Switch, just because, yeah, like I said, like, it just lends itself to that kind of format a little bit better than some of the more, I don't want to say realistic, but a little bit more traditional looking Gundam stuff. Here's the part where I do think the SD Gundam Battle Alliance is worth revisiting on the Nintendo Switch 2, and that is the TV version. When you play this docked, this game looks phenomenal, and the main reason for that is that the Switch 2 does play in 4K 60 FPS. Now, when I've played SD Gundam Battle Alliance, I've played it in 4K because I've played it on a PS5, but I mainly play it on a monitor. So again, it looks really good, but I played on my Switch 2 downstairs on a 4K TV, and this game looks phenomenal because you also have the HDR with the Switch 2, so the colors pop really well, the visuals just stand out, like, everything about it just looks clean and crisp, and it's a fantastic experience playing it on a TV. The whole benefit of having like a Switch is that you do have both those versions, but I think in particular, it is really the only handheld console that now exists. Like, there's that and the Steam Deck, but in terms of an actual console, the Switch and thus the Switch 2 are the only ones that are really now at the forefront. So it's kind of the go-to handheld console nowadays. So that's, yeah, really has always been the selling point of the Switch, is the fact that you can play it handheld, but you can also dock it as well. So usually that is the reason I would go for a game on the Switch, because of the handheld version. But I think now, like, looking at SD Gundam Battle Alliance and playing it on a TV, I think kind of changes my perspective a little bit in terms of how I will approach what games I buy on which console. It's no longer necessarily going to be that I just buy, the things I want to play in handheld or the Switch exclusives. It's going to be like, okay, do I want to play this game in like a really good quality, but then do I also want to take it on the go a little bit as well? And I think that's where the Switch 2 really works. Like, it does have that portability to it, but because the quality of it in docked mode is now as good, probably, at least as the PS4, but I would say it's quite on par with the PS5. Of course, it's not going to play like a God of War game, for example, but in terms of your third-party games, I would say that it looks as good on a Switch 2 as it does on a PS5. So to go back to the question that we started this video with, is SD Gundam Battle Alliance worth replaying on the Nintendo Switch 2? And it's a very complex answer because there's for reasons and there's against reasons. On the one hand, portability is great. It looks fantastic on a TV. But on the other hand, if you don't own a Switch 2, do not go out and buy that console just to play this game, because it still looks good on the Nintendo Switch. If you already own a PS5, you can just play it on there. Like, I don't think it's worth going out and getting this console specifically because it delivers an experience that's unparalleled on any other console. I just think that if you already own a Switch 2, I would recommend playing it. And like I said, even if you have already played it on the Nintendo Switch, it is worth replaying again, especially if you haven't played it on the PS5, because you can play it in a docked mode and it looks phenomenal. You get that proper experience, the best experience, in my opinion, that you can get from this game. That, again, can be delivered on PS5, can be delivered on PC, but if you don't have either of those, then the Switch 2, if you already own it, is definitely worth it. Before I get out of here though, please do leave a like on this video and subscribe if you're a fan of mecha anime content and want to see plenty more videos like this in the future. Also, like I said earlier, head on down to the comment section below. Let me know your thoughts on SD Gundam Battle Alliance, and if you've played it on the Nintendo Switch 2, what do you think of it? If you do own a Nintendo Switch 2, if you don't own this game as well, are you going to now go out and buy it just for the sake of trying to play it in the docked mode and also trying to play it in the handheld mode and seeing what you think for yourself? Thank you once again for tuning into Mecha Chat today. I'll see you guys next time.